Well, hi everyone. I'm showing that we're live on Facebook. If you're here for the noon live cast, you're in the right place. I'm just going to be giving people about a minute or so to find us. And while we do that, Marissa and I will be sharing over on our personal pages so that hopefully more folks will be able to access the interview in real time. So again, if you're here for the noon live cast, you are certainly in the right place.
Shared.
Go, wonderful. So again, if you're here for the noon live cast to celebrate the release day of Trauma and the 12 Steps on audiobook, you are in the right place. Oh, Marissa has it in front of her. Let me make sure I have mine in front of me. So yes, today is July 28th, the updated release day of Trauma and the 12 Steps. So I shouldn't say the updated release date, it's the audiobook release day of Trauma and the 12 Steps, which did release already on July 7th. And North Atlantic Books, the publisher, had initially planned on releasing the audiobook in August, but we're able to move it up to July. So I'm very happy and quite thrilled today to be joined by Marissa Gavami, who is, I know her mostly through her work primarily through Healing Tree. So a lot of you see me post about Healing Tree, which is a marvelous nonprofit I'm sure we'll be talking about at some point that Marissa co-founded and of which she is the CEO. Marissa is also a very gifted actress and performer and voiceover artist, voice talent. And I'm delighted that somebody I know so well and somebody that knows trauma so well was able to do the voice talent for the audiobook. So welcome, Marissa, to the live cast.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm so grateful to have done the narration for your amazing book.
Yes, so if you're just joining us, Marissa is the voice on the audiobook of Trauma and the 12 Steps. So it's delighted. I've wanted to do a live cast from us with Marissa for quite some time, and it just felt like a fitting day to do it here on audiobook release day. So Marissa, tell us a little bit about your background as a performer, specifically some of the work you've done with voice.
Sure. So really, I've been in the entertainment world or storytelling world, as I'd prefer to call it, since I was a kid. I started working as a model when I was really young, and then as an actor, the first time I worked professionally, I was 7. So a very long time. I started doing regional theater, and I'm also a singer. When I was 12, I started working more nationally when I won It's Showtime at the Apollo and got to sing at the legendary Apollo Theater in New York City and on NBC. And I started doing voice work when I was about 20. I was with an agency in New York City. I had been doing a little bit of film and TV, and I was with a theatrical agent, and that theatrical doesn't mean just theater, it's theater, film, and television. Mm-hmm. And one of the agents had just come over from the voiceover department. And she said, "You have a great voice. Do you want to do voiceover? Have you ever wanted to do it?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And I did a little bit when I was younger, and I would love to get into it. I've heard that it's hard to break into. And so she introduced me to the voiceover folks. And then I began doing some commercial voiceovers. So I've done McDonald's for JCPenney, and I had never done a narration. And so when you told me that your book was getting an audiobook, I did a shameless plug of, may I please audition, because I would love, to do this gig.
Yeah, so I want to tell that story because I think it's a cool story. Marissa and I had a call scheduled that day that was Healing Tree related because I am on Healing Tree's board of advisors, and Marissa and her work with Healing Tree has worked with the Institute for Creative Mindfulness and some of our team offering EMDR trainings in Kentucky. So Marissa and I have a lot of business that we often talk about, and it just so happened, I just love the synchronicity, the kismet of all of this, that the day Marissa and I had a call scheduled, like literally the hour before I heard from North Atlantic Books, the publisher. Yeah, it was so like right on, like just before we called, I had heard from North Atlantic Books that I was being given an audiobook because that's decisions publishers have to make to see if they have the interest to fund an audiobook. And I just mentioned it to you kind of in a friendly way as my good news for the day. And yeah, as you said, it was your shameless plug, but I'm just, no, to me, it was a great example and reminding me, hey, I do voiceover work. And it really dawned on me at that point, I would love for Marissa to do this because you know trauma. I mean, I know you have the talent to do voice work. That's not even, wasn't even an issue for me, because yeah, when they explained it to me, they said, yeah, we'll send you like 3 or 4 potential persons reading and you can pick which voice is most congruent and most with your vision. And then as soon as you mentioned it, I made the plug to North Atlantic to have you do it.
And I had to
And
audition. This was not just
yeah, I
OJ
know.
says. So I had to audition. I had to have a callback. I had to do it again. And, you know, I definitely went through all of the steps, but I was so pleased that they liked me enough to let me do it. And
yes.
honestly, it was a dream come true. I mean, I think I'm a book nerd, so I read all the time. And oftentimes I'm actually listening to books that I'm reading, right? So I've long loved Audible and audiobooks. And then to get to do not only a narrative gig, but then on a topic that, you know, half of my work is in the trauma world, that was just amazing. And to get to voice my dear friend's words was just, I don't even know. I don't even know. It was just all a dream come true.
And it's really cool. I have a confession to make today that I mean, I have tons of Audible credits because I'm I consume Audible work a lot. So of course I downloaded it on Audible, even though they sent me the files to listen to. I wanted to hear it on Audible like everybody else would be. And I had to drive into town today to do a radio appearance. And I got to listen to the first 2 chapters as I drove up and back. And I was just so pleased because I've always said that how performers grow is when you can hear your work back. Like as a speaker, I make sure that I record myself or I hear recordings of myself speaking at least a couple times a year, because that's how I hear the patterns that I don't like. That's how I hear where I have opportunities for growth. And I think it is a really cool experience for authors to listen to someone else read back their work. Oh, and wow. I'm so excited as I drive the next couple days to hear the whole thing, even though I certainly heard excerpts as part of your process as you went through. And I'm just so pleased. So tell me and tell our listeners, because I think a lot of people just assume audiobooks happen, but there's a lot of hard work.
They do not just happen.
that goes into it. So talk to us about the process of recording an audiobook.
Oh my gosh. Well, honestly, it was a learning process for me because when I was doing something, say like McDonald's commercial, right? You go into an in-person session typically. There will be 2 booths, typically yourself, and then like a director editor will be in a booth next to you. And as you're recording, they'll say, can you sound a little bit more like Lindsay Lohan on this line? Or like whatever they have in their mind, right? And they'll say, no, you messed that up. Oh, too breathy there, or not breathy enough, or too loud, or whatever, right? And they're directing you as you're going. And you're also just speaking, I don't know, maybe a paragraph at most in these commercial voiceover gigs, right? So that's one thing. And it's pretty easy. I have to, you know, once you have the vocal training, and a lot of actors do voice work because we are trained to have a neutral American dialect. We're trained in IPA. We're trained, our voice and our speech is very trained, right? So that part, once you have that done, is easy. This was not that. So I did the gig in my own basement. A lot of audiobooks are now being recorded at home. So you have an at-home studio. So I have a little mic. I have like a little popper sound device
shield,
that helps me not make too much, right? And then I had a little booth, and I had a blanket over the booth, and I had to turn off all the ACs, and I had to close the vents, and I had to have a blanket over the fireplace. By the way, I'm recording this in Louisville, Kentucky, not in New York City where I normally live. So I was recording this at the beginning of quarantine. And you know, I am in a booth with a can of pineapples, because I learned that pineapples help you not make clicking noises in your mouth. So this is a voiceover trick that I learned along the way. And so I'm eating a couple, you know, little like crushed pineapples right before I go. I'm swishing them around my mouth, and then I'm doing all these vocal exercises, and I'm warming up my body, right? And then I record and I send it into April Alvarez, who is the best proofer I could ever imagine. She's the kindest, best person to work with. And she says, okay, how about this? And how about that? But I just recorded a chapter, right? So it's very different to have to get your kind of direction after you're done recording for hours at times, right? And to try to match and to try to catch yourself. And, when it's just you and your voice, a way that people can try to understand is by putting two books here, you can hear yourself a little bit better if you block off your ears. And you will hear things that you never knew you did, right? Yeah. And so with just a voice, there's no background music, there's no editing, there's, it was very tedious. I'm not gonna lie, it's a tedious job. And it was frustrating at times because I felt like there was just so many things that I was responsible for as not only a voiceover artist, but as the engineer, which I'm not used to. But I have to say, when I got to the point of listening to things back, or when I was really just in the moment, and what I did was I pretended I was reading to someone that I know. So I did it directly to someone almost the entire time. When I was in those really present moments and realizing that I was using a gift that I had and a skill set that I had to bring your words, which I believe in so much, to life in a way that otherwise, we wouldn't have that, right? Or we would have it in a different way. And this was a unique experience for someone who is the CEO of Healing Tree to voice this book. I felt like magic. It just felt like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. That's my cat who, also would sometimes meow at the top of the steps. That's actually Viola. She would meow.
Oh, that's Viola. Okay.
Pause and then, thanks for ruining my take, Viola. Yeah.
I've had that experience with my cats too here while I've recorded some yoga nidras and yoga material. Oh, indeed. And I was very grateful to be a part of the collaborative process, because I remember at the beginning you were trying to get a sense of what kind of tone was I going for.
Absolutely.
What kind of tone did I most want? Also compromising with the tone that North Atlantic Books told us is standard for audiobooks. And I know something I shared with you, and I'm delighted to hear you said that you read it as if you were reading it to someone, because something I shared with you at the beginning of this process is some feedback I've always received about my writing that I take to heart, because this is the kind of clinical writer I try to be, is that reading one of my books is like sitting down and having a cup of tea with me.
Yeah.
And I really endeavor to convey that tone in how I write. And so I know I shared that with you at the beginning of the process, and I feel it came through just beautifully.
I would use that, and I would even, I would picture us like, this is so nerdy, but I would picture us like in a cabin. I don't know why I think we like live in a cabin, but I would picture us like at your home, which in my mind was a cabin, and like Mary's there, and like your other friends and colleagues are there, and like my mom and my partner are there, and we're all sipping tea, and we're having like a reading of it. And then I'm looking at somebody in our little gathering audience friend group who I know has suffered from addiction, and I'm reading it to them. And then sometimes I would do it depending on the tone of the chapter, because I think sometimes things change throughout the book as far as like how intimate it is, or sometimes it's more like, okay, now I'm gonna preach, and then sometimes it's more like lighthearted. And depending on what the tone was, I would imagine us in different scenarios. Yes. And so maybe that came through, maybe it didn't, but that's certainly what I was doing.
Yes. The little bit I've listened to already, and I know I heard some excerpts along the way, but the 2 chapters I listened to this morning already, I was just so impressed with that. And I know another cool way that I felt involved with the process is every couple of days I would get texts from you just to verify your pronunciation on certain words, especially a lot of last names like Danziger and Nowinski and all of that. And I was listening this morning and thinking, yes, she nailed it. It's great.
I'm so glad. And I would send your recordings to the proofer, April as well, and say, listen back, because I don't want to be the only person, who's hears this, right? So that was really interesting. And also just, it was fun because North Atlantic says to me, why don't you send a batch to us, and then we'll send it to Jamie and wait for a response, and then we'll send it back. And I was like, I know Jamie, may I text Jamie? Yep. And they said, yeah. Yep. So that was really nice. It was just a unique experience that I don't know how many voiceover artists get to voice books written by friends and colleagues on topics that they also work in that field. I think it's a very rare experience. So I'm just enormously grateful.
So let's shift gears and go there. What, and I know you've hinted at this a few times already in this interview, but what was it feeling wise, emotion wise, sensation wise to be voicing a book on trauma, which, as you said, is a big part of your life and your work?
Yeah, it was it was the thing that kept me going through the frustrations of the technical aspects of the job.
Mm-hmm.
It was the thing that I thought, this is such a gift. And for me, I mean, I'm a national public speaker, right? And I'm the CEO of Healing Tree, and I've started recently coaching and consulting on trauma. And as an actor, a lot of the projects that I get to work on, there's some sort of advocacy component. Sometimes after, say, a play, I'll also be on an expert panel, which is really cool. So I get to work in this in similar ways, but to get to do a book that would forever be there. I mean, I'll be gone and it will be on Audible, right? It was a type of privilege that I've never experienced before, really. And to get to read your words, which are so eloquent and heartfelt, but also just utterly spot on in the field and in what's needed. And you also do this really great thing where for people who are maybe a little trauma shy, right? Maybe they're very medical model, maybe they're very, they haven't been exposed to this work. You are so inclusive and inviting to them, and you're not so black and white, and it allows people to hear what you're really saying and what people like me also are really saying. It was such a privilege to be able to not just say my words, but someone's words whom I've looked up to and whom I've read, right? And whose work has helped me. And to be able to put that out there just felt like a beautiful merge of all of these areas that I love and am passionate about.
Fusion, union,
Yeah.
bridge building. I adore that. And I really like your use of the phrase trauma shy, trauma skittish. Yeah, because that's
Right.
a big part of who I'm writing
Yeah,
to with this.
absolutely.
So if anybody is joining us live right now, I see that several of you are. If you have a question or a comment, I'd be happy to try to take it while we're still here online. I'd like to hear from you. I mean, I know about it, but some of our listeners may not, about Healing Tree, your organization.
Sure.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about Healing Tree?
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. So Healing Tree stands for Healing Trauma, Resources, Education, and Empowerment. And basically we advocate healing from abuse and trauma rather than coping with the symptoms. We achieve this by providing trauma-focused resources and education, and by producing and partnering with relevant film, TV, and theater in order to create the social change necessary for this healing movement. So Healing Tree was founded in 2014, which feels just wild how long ago that actually was. It feels kind of like yesterday. It was founded by myself, my mother, and my former therapist who helped save my life. And basically, we founded it because I went through some severe trauma, severe abuse and subsequent trauma in my late adolescence. And I was left with a diagnosis of complex PTSD and psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. Those were lucky diagnoses or fortunate diagnoses because really my symptoms were ranging from, several mental illnesses. I could have been misdiagnosed bipolar, borderline, schizophrenic, anything, truly. And I think those of us who know about complex trauma know that so many symptoms from other mental illnesses, right? It all comes down to trauma in a lot of cases. Sure. So come on, kitty, Viola might. So basically I was able, thanks to trauma-focused treatment like EMDR, which you are an incredible trainer of, and like sensory motor psychotherapy, like somatic experiencing, like brain spotting, like trauma-sensitive yoga, all of these brain-body-based modalities, I was able to make a full recovery. Now, it wasn't easy and it wasn't quick. It took about 5 years, and I think healing is always ongoing. Mm-hmm. But after 5 years, I was able to lose those diagnoses and I was able to return to my life. And I, during this process, started learning, obviously I had to get well, about the trauma field. And what I learned was that this was not standard. And what I learned was that a lot of my friends who were in therapy, maybe for depression, anxiety, addiction, OCD, an eating disorder, whatever it may be, they were not being told what I was being told. They were not being told, hey, something happened to you, or a series of things happened to you. And it's not about what's wrong with you, but about these things that happened. And hey, neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to rewire into adulthood, that's just a scientific fact. So even if you have a genetic predisposition, even if you have a chemical imbalance, your brain can still move towards healing. A lot of my friends were just being told, oh, it runs in your family, and here's a pill and you're going to need it the rest of your life, and come in once a week and manage it. And while I am not against medication if it's needed, and while I'm not against talk therapy if it's helpful, what I am against is not telling people that our experiences shape us and can lead to mental illness, physical illness, behavioral problems, relational problems, addictions, etc. And so I started making the connection. Well, my friend who deals with addiction, well, she told me her boyfriend choked her. You know, my friend who deals with social anxiety, she told me I'm sorry, I was over there every day. Her mother was yelling at her. You know, my friend who, whatever, the list goes on, right? And what I learned was that this contributes to almost every problem in our society. Not just in our homes, not just in our families, in our communities, society at large. Even things like systemic oppression. When the majority of society is too unwell to be empathetic enough to care and dismantle these systems, we must deal with trauma at the root. When we're looking at suicide rates, mental illness rates, when we're looking at certainly domestic violence, all of these things, if we don't deal with the trauma properly, we can't really turn the tide. So I got fired up when I learned this, and I thought, I'm going to volunteer with an organization who is doing something about it. And what I found were these amazing organizations treating trauma in their area, right? Like the Trauma Center at JRI, or, you know, something like the Meadows. I found amazing national organizations that dealt with abuse, but they would typically be one type of abuse, like domestic violence or sex trafficking. Or I would find mental illness organizations or mental health organizations. And I didn't find one national organization that was dealing with trauma, whether it's from domestic violence, emotional neglect, war, systemic oppression, natural disaster, right? All of these areas, trauma at the root, and saying this is a public health crisis. It affects almost all of us on some end of the spectrum and on some level, and let's do something about it to make healing the new normal. Let's make this a public awareness thing. So when I couldn't find it, I founded Healing Tree. And so that's sort of why we exist and what we hope to do in our culture.
Yeah, and if you've not visited Healing Tree's site yet, please do. It's healingtree.org, yes?
No, it's healingtrenonprofit.org.
I always forget that part.
It was like 40 grand or something to buy that URL.
Yep,
So,
Healing Tree.
It's Healing Tree Nonprofit.
Healingtrenonprofit.org. Healingtrenonprofit.org. It's an amazing treasure trove of resources. And Marissa, I just want to thank you for the role you've played in facilitating raising funds to get so many clinicians trained in EMDR. I know that's a big part of your mission. And for really just advancing the conversation about trauma, because I remember when I was talking about you to one of my EMDR colleagues and a little bit about your story and what you discovered, they said, oh, so she's disappointed right along with the rest of us about how the field works. And I said, yes, because it is a bit of a dirty little secret that I think a lot of people in the general public don't realize, that even amongst the mental health field and so much of the medical model influence in it, there's just still this idea of what's wrong with you. How do we quick fix it? What's the pill that we need to take? And not looking at trauma at the root. And I think that's scary. And I think that's why that's scary for a lot of people to do, is because it means we have to take some responsibility, not only for our own healing, but I also think it means we have to take responsibility for the wounding we create with each other. And I mean, that's why I always say, when you have a child coming in who's acting out, it is so much easier to give them a bipolar diagnosis or an ADD diagnosis. And I'm not saying those conditions aren't legitimate, because they can be, but usually it's a misdiagnosed trauma issue, because it becomes so much easier to say that kid's brain is the problem, as opposed to what society, schooling, and often family units have put a child through.
And so it's not even if it's a misdiagnosis, you may have all those symptoms that meet the criteria for that diagnosis. To me, it's a misclassification of what does that mean and what do we do with that diagnosis, right?
Exactly. How do we treat it? And a lot of that is understanding the proper origin. So I think for us to truly have a sea change here in how we as a society respond to trauma, we do need people like you who are not clinicians. And I don't mean that as a put down at you're an artist, and people of every profession have to realize that understanding and healing trauma and advocating for trauma is all of our jobs. And so I really applaud you for doing that, which is why I'm delighted to be a part of the organization.
Thank you. I'm so grateful that you are. And I think, on the note of being an artist and not a clinician, I remember going to the first trauma conference back when I was, I don't know, maybe 5 or so years ago. And I remember being in a group of all therapists, and we were doing some trauma drama. And the leader of the group came up to me and said, "You're not a therapist, you're a professional actor, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yes, but two, I think these therapists are amazing actors. So I'm actually surprised that you could pick me out, because they're all amazing." And I've had a lot of people at that conference and just in my life say, "Well, did you want to go to school, to be a psychologist? Do you want to be a clinician?" And I've always given them a resounding no, because there are people doing that work, and that's what they're meant to be doing. Like yourself, you're doing amazing work. I'm not meant to be doing that, I don't believe. I am meant to be using my position as an artist to create a film like Silk, which you co-produced with us last year,
Yes.
to create the conversation around it, because I think that we need all types of people, like you just said. And to me, actors have this beautiful way of, it's in our training. Why do people do what they do? When we get a script, when I look at a character, my first question is, why do they act in this way? And I go through the script and I go, okay, well, their mom did this in the first act, right? Backstory, right? And so when we're looking at society, it's been in my, consciousness to look around me and go, why is this person acting in this way? Why do they have these symptoms? Because that's how I've been trained. And also as an actor, so many of us in theater school are trained to get in touch with our felt sense. So to me, sitting down and doing EMDR and getting in touch with where my trauma is in my body was second nature. And so I feel like I'm able to help people who maybe haven't had that training understand what that is, right? And so I think we all just are unique, and I've never felt the need to lose my artist roots to do this advocacy work. In fact, I felt like it's a superpower to join them.
Yes, you bring up the amazing idea that the arts and the healing arts have so much to learn from each other and are inextricably linked. I know so much of the great trauma education I share with people is watch this film, because this film really nails it.
Yeah.
And look at what this character is going through, and just think of how much, it's interesting you say trauma drama, but how much good drama that we consume, and even a lot of the comedy that we consume has roots in a traumatic situation. So so much can be learned from each other. And obviously, as an expressive arts therapist, I feel strongly about that. And I think that's a lot of what drew me to your organization, was to see how you were really harnessing artists to use their voice. And I'm just delighted that we're continuing the synergism. So we have a very good question from a fellow artist, Aaron, our mutual friend now. He said, "I appreciate the way you talk about the time recovery takes. It's a long process. Did you notice a lot of improvement along the way?" So, and I guess I would echo that, like, were there small signs that you were heading in the right direction here? Because I think some folks can be overwhelmed by the length of the process.
Hindsight is 2020. Looking back, I'm not going to lie. There were moments 3 years into my recovery process where I was suicidal, and where I would say, I'm not getting any better. This isn't working. I'm never going to get well. I'm going to be stuck like this. This is my life now. I'm never going to get to act again. I'm never going to get my life back. Yeah, I mean, I was angry. I was stuck. I was not believing in the process. And luckily, I had good people around me saying, this is the journey, and you're on a downward slope right this second, but you're not here, which is where you were 2 years ago, right? And I had my mom, who was primarily the person there for me, mirroring back to me, no, but what did you say last month? What did you say 3 months ago? And I started actually using my phone. I would use voice memos, and I would record memos to myself. And when I was feeling good, I would say, don't give up. And these are all the ways that you've improved. So I did feel improvement. I mean, I remember the first year, I one day didn't feel in physical pain anymore. And I thought, oh my God, my physical pain isn't there. But I had gotten used to it. So it was almost like it shocked me, because I didn't even realize it was there, sort of. I remember these milestones, I remember being triggered by my friends. I used to have a trigger if somebody would touch my back. I remember being triggered and going from completely splitting off to saying, I need you to sit over there right now, and I need you to not touch me, and I need you to just let me calm down. That was improvement, right? So yeah, I mean, I noticed changes, but when you're buried in traumatic symptoms, you can start feeling like okay, well, great. I'm not in excruciating physical pain, but I still have all of this. So I don't want to
Mhm.
act like I was just like zenned out the whole time.
Yeah.
And, because that's not true. Also, I wanted to add, you're an incredible artist. And I wonder if, you've also been asked like, well, do you want to go, try to get a record deal or try to get, you know what I mean? And it's like, well, I think it's really great that you bring your
Mhm.
artistry to your clinical work, as opposed to just saying, I'm not going to be a clinician anymore. I'm going to go be an artist. It's the same, we're sort of
Right.
two sides to the same coin.
Well, you tell an interesting, I mean, I guess I'll share this story then. So when I finished my undergrad, I really wanted to go to film school because one of my undergrad degrees is in English and American Studies, which basically means I have a pop culture degree, and I devoured every film class possible. And even though I had some experience performing, mostly on the singer-songwriter end at that point, I liked more of the directing aspect of film. And basically, I was told it was not a good idea by my mother. I've
Oh,
since forgiven her for that.
oh,
To go to film school because you're going to starve in the arts, which is a legitimate concern I think a
right.
lot of parents have. But it is something
You might
I
not.
kind of, it's something I kind of carried with me as a lot of regret over the years. And even when I ended up working with one of my EMDR therapists, she said, you have to find a way to bring the arts into your work. And I had always been doing it with some of the expressive arts angle. Like I do visual art with my folks. I dance with my folks, of course. We do a lot with putting together playlists and even some music making if appropriate. And then several years back, I started building this YouTube channel, which has video content for therapists and the general public going through different
Amazing.
skills, some short films on what it means to redefine therapy. And yeah, I was delighted, as you said, to co-produce Silk. So in a way, I feel like it's all come full circle with
Absolutely.
there's a place for therapists, especially because I'm a therapist, but I am primarily an educator at this point, training other therapists, advocating for other therapists. And I just love bringing the arts into my work. I love bringing expressive arts into how I train other therapists because it gives you a real embodied journey into this
Absolutely.
process, as opposed to, I remember my frustration was many years ago. Yes, we were getting more savvy about trauma stored in the body. You got to work with the body to work with trauma. Yet at so many of these conferences, we were just sitting on our asses watching PowerPoints for 3 hours,
Yeah.
6 hours at a time. And there's a disconnect here. So
Right.
that's when I started teaching dancing mindfulness classes at conferences and trying to bring more expressive arts content, not just into expressive arts conferences, but into trauma conferences, into addiction
Yeah.
conferences, so that we can work on our own stuff. Because I really believe no amount of technical training is truly going to empower you to work with trauma as a professional as much as taking your own journey into this. And Erin, I appreciate your question so much because it has still been a process for me. And I mean, I'm 18 years sober and 16 years into my formal trauma recovery journey. And yes, I still have moments where I can experience the fleeting suicidal thought. I still have moments where I ask, what's this all for? Why have I done all this? And fortunately, I'm at this place in my healing where I can allow them to happen. I can appreciate and respect my humanity. But then I know, wait, I am not those thoughts. I am
Right.
no longer connected to that story. And so I think with more time, I've gotten more distance and I've learned how to appropriately manage triggers or just landmines when they come up. Because a big myth I try to confront out there is that trauma or addiction recovery is not just suddenly you're going to have a good round of EMDR and it's all going to clear up.
No.
It's a process. It is a process. And yes, if you have a couple of those good rounds of EMDR, you are going to notice a big shift in your life. Yet for me, I had to couple that with yoga and meditation and expressive arts. And I think we definitely heal in layers, just like wounds can heal in layers. But I'm grateful for the understanding that we better know how to do that today and
Absolutely.
how to
I
guide
noticed
people through that.
when new traumas come up, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
When
go.
when new traumas come up, the way I deal with them is so different, right? And what's really beautiful is that it's even different than what I did before I faced really significant trauma. So
Mm,
it's post-traumatic growth.
yes.
And it doesn't mean that I can't be traumatized though, right?
Mhm.
So I also think we like we tend to make everything so labeled and in these boxes and like clinical. And I don't know any human being who doesn't experience what people could technically classify as some form of mental illness. I don't know anybody. I really don't. And maybe that's because I'm friends with a bunch of artists and, you know, the whole stereotype of artists being a little out there. But I mean, all the people I'm surrounded by, I can ask them and they'll tell me periods of their life of depression or anxiety, at least, right? And so I think we've just got to realize, like, this is just what it is to live on this earth, that we go through these things. And to me, the goal is to help us know that we can move through them and that it doesn't have to be a fixed state.
And you know this from reading so much of my work now, that if we appreciate that trauma is wounding, yes, we have all been wounded by life.
Mm-hmm.
Even those of us who maybe have escaped without a clinical diagnosis have had some kind of wound to either be aware of, to address, or to heal. And how can we continue to create spaces that collectively support each other in that healing? That is so much of the questions I think drives both of our work.
Absolutely. And that brings up a good point, that even if it's not clinical, right? Like, how many of our friends, colleagues, family members, neighbors do we know who aren't living to their fullest potential? Well, why is that? Is that trauma? And oftentimes, I think those of us who are very ambitious and shoot for the stars, we bump up against our trauma more because we realize, oh, there's a chain holding me down. Oh, there's some more stuff. And if we just sort of live comfortably and don't go out of our comfort zone too much, right? And don't really go after what we really, really want, we may not notice it as much. But I believe that when we start moving towards what we really want out of life, sometimes things come up that otherwise we might not have noticed.
Preach.
You know?
Oh, I feel like I could keep talking with you forever about this. So, but we do have to start wrapping up. So Marissa agreed to grace us with a reading from Trauma and the 12 Steps. Right. So again, if you're just joining us or you joined late, this is Marissa Gavami, who is the voice of the audiobook for Trauma and the 12 Steps, a dear friend of mine and a trauma advocate, voiceover artist. So I told Marissa to choose a passage that she wanted to share today that most spoke to her heart. So I will turn it over to you.
All right, I chose a passage from chapter 11, which is Respect for Change, Trauma-Sensitive Recovery in a Diverse World. And all mine's autographed by Jamie. Thank you. I want to show everyone because it makes me so happy.
Aw.
That was Nathan saying, hey, hi.
Hi, Nathan. Good to hear from you.
Okay. This is from page 206. Nikki Myers, the founder of Yoga of 12-Step Recovery, graciously shared her story for my 2014 book, Trauma Made Simple: Competencies in Assessment, Treatment, and Working with Survivors. A powerful African-American woman who is a force for healing and good in the world, Nikki offered a reflection about being a child during the civil rights movement of the 1960s that speaks to the impact of oppressive cognitions as a trauma recovery issue. Something had to be wrong with me if these people who looked like me were being treated this way. Everything I learned in school taught me that government and authority was to be respected. So if government and authority was doing this to children like me, I must be flawed. Nikki's work, which aligns with somatic experiencing and the teachings of Peter Levine, recognizes that unhealed trauma leaves an energetic imprint on the body. These visceral imprints are very real and can be even more impacting when they fester day in and day out. Although many people who have experienced oppression can pinpoint one or two major events in their lives that might qualify for a PTSD diagnosis, it's the cumulative impact that can be more damaging. A student of color once described her experience of racism to me as the trauma of 1,000 paper cuts. This brings the wound metaphor introduced in chapter 3 into sobering perspective.
Thank you so much, my friend. And I'm just putting it out there to the universe that I hope this is not the last audiobook collaboration that we work on.
Me either, absolutely.
So, Marissa, can you tell our audience, please, where they can either connect with you personally or how to get in touch with Healing Tree?
Absolutely. You can connect with me on social media. I actually put my social media handle here. So at Marissa Gavami on Instagram, and I have a Facebook page as well, but I'm much more active on Instagram. And then you can go on my website if you're interested in learning more about the various areas in which I work. So that's just my first and last name.com. So www.marissagavami.com. And Healing Tree, you can connect with Healing Tree at facebook.com/healingtreenonprofit.org and on Instagram at healingtree.org. And the Healing Tree website, which Jamie already plugged earlier, thank you, healingtreenonprofit.org. And yeah, please shoot me a message. You know, I love to interact, and I certainly love to interact with you, Jamie. So thank you so much for today.
You are most welcome. Thank you, Marissa.